Сзади на столе.
Morning to you. Good to see you. And fantastic result on Saturday.
Доброго ранку, ми будемо починати. Будь ласка, займайте.
Good morning. We are about to start. The discussion is going to be in two languages, so the English language and the Ukrainian, of course. So if you don't speak both, pick up a headphone for interpretation.
Добрий день.
So, Your Excellencies, ambassadors, dear participants, dear speakers, dear online viewers, New Europe Center, us, we are presenting our annual, let me emphasize, annual all-national survey, foreign policy and security, opinions of the Ukrainian society. As many of you might know, at New Europe Center we are usually guided in our advocacy and our think tank operators. So we are guided by opinions of different stakeholders and representatives of the Ukrainian authorities and also representatives of our international partners and the Ukrainian society, the general public, of course. And we call it evidence-based foreign policy. I do not know how to put it in Ukrainian. Well, it's evidence-based. This is one of our key principles for the think tank in question. So we have lots of surveys, both in Ukraine and beyond, in the EU jurisdictions, in the United States. And presently we would like to start summarizing, well, presenting a Ukrainian opinion poll. The majority of questions we had previously to establish the dynamic. Some of them we don't really like, we're not happy about because the situation changes, but we wanted to see it as it goes, the opinions of the Ukrainian society for the third year of this full-scale genocide-driven aggression against Ukraine. So, for presentation of this survey done on request of New Europe Center with the support of International Renaissance Foundation and InfoSapiens agency, Serhiy Solodky. You have your handouts in both languages, so Serhiy, please. the principal conclusions that we made and that attracted our attention in terms of developments and the new discoveries that we made, and then we'll have this opinion of the Ukrainian authorities, and some representatives, the two ambassadors, Katerina Maternova, will come at a later stage because she has a busy schedule for today. It is not a surprise, of course, but we convinced her to come at her convenience and leave also at her convenience for the day. But that's my announcement about her. Sergei, the floor is yours. Well, dear participants, good morning. Let me be brief. On the first slide, dear colleagues, the first issue was, the first question was the best safeguard of security for Ukraine. The two first positions, the winners, in terms of rating, 31.3% development of a nuclear weapon, and second, accession to NATO. And we can see the two spirits fighting, the two zeitgeist, so to speak. One, the autonomous approach, when Ukrainians rely upon themselves, as usual, not the partners, but also we can see that this approach to relying upon collective security persists. And despite all the frustration with the Western support, we can see that trust in Western institutions is retained by the Ukrainian society at a fairly high level. And the second question, is it worth for Ukraine to have negotiations with Russia without any security safeguards on the part of the West? 64, even more percent of Ukrainians are against such talks without any security guarantees rendered by the West. And we asked under what circumstances the talks had to be conducted. Ukrainians seem to be very skeptical about the talks about talks, and they say that withdrawal of the Russian force is condition number one, and the second prerequisite is, again, security guarantees from the West. We can see here that the Ukrainian authorities are very much in tune with the general public. Let me clarify. Withdrawal at least to the line of February 2029, and not all the territory. It used to be all the territory, not anymore. An important detail. And admissibility, acceptability of compromises with the aggressor country. More than 50% of Ukrainians are against any kind of trade-off with the aggressor. The leading position, while leaving all the hunt behind, is the army, downsizing 74.5%. Cannot accept it, and the Russian language with an official status almost 70% against, almost 71% against. Well, for the first time in my memory, anyway, we put this question to Ukrainians about their attitude to the progressive accession to NATO. Well, there is a difference between partial and gradual accession. Partial means that we go now to NATO in parts, given part of the territory to the aggressor, trading the territorial integrity to for this opportunity, and secondly, well, all the territory, but Article 5 temporarily encompassing the territories not controlled by Russia, but in the future all the territory. So this is supported by 70.5% of Ukrainian. The vast majority, we can call it, but if we put a question in a slightly different fashion, that's what we call partial membership in NATO. Ukrainians are against this partial membership. And what matters here in such sensitive issues is to explain to Ukrainians what specific solutions or decisions mean in terms of foreign policy and foreign politics. Membership in the EU. Well, in fact, the results are not conclusive, but the super Euro optimists have the majority. They seem that within 5 years, seem to think that, and that this coincides with the Ukrainian authorities' plans, at least the ones announced on numerous occasions. And another matter, and we can discuss the dynamics, perhaps some negative dynamics here. We asked the Ukrainians what association they have when the US representatives point to corruption in Ukraine. 63% are in favor of this pressure to overcome corruption dynamics. We can see that last year that was 70%. This year it's 63%, so a bit of downsizing trend, external pressure, and now with the pretext of combating corruption, and the US are looking for an excuse. Some people say to decrease their support. 70.7. This is 4% higher. 7 and 3. This is 11. So for now we can see some skeptical 57.2% think that our partners do not do enough for the victory of Ukraine, and it's only 32.6% think that they do. We ask Ukrainians about their attitude to the victory plan, one of the dominated positions, almost at 31%. Ukrainians think that all depends on our partners, and the plan was designed for gaining their support. And the last, in this slide, the last question about trust in international organizations. The leading organizations are the EU, almost 70%, NATO, G7, and very low trust in UN and OECD. And international leaders. This is the top 5. Number 1, Ursula von der Leyen, president of the EC. She was making titanic efforts for the EU to decide in favor of Ukraine last year. Andrzej Duda, president of Poland, the second position. The third, quite unexpected, Justin Trudeau of Canada, and Emmanuel Macron of France, the only Western leader who has some gain in terms of popularity amongst Ukrainians. The rest of the leaders are actually losing their positions. And Maya Sandu, newly re-elected president of Moldova. Thank you, Sergei. We will have the opportunity to discuss it again and come back to this. Now the floor is given to Igor Zhokwa, Deputy Head of Presidential Office, Diplomatic Advisor to the President of Ukraine. I'm not asking you to comment the survey on the survey, though in my opinion some results may reinforce your positions in the talks with our Western partners. They mind the general public's position very much. We'll have the happiness to live in a democratic country. So the public opinion matters here. So we would like to know your stance as to some key issues. proposed for consideration the society security guarantees as an absolute prerequisite partial accession to NATO. President made some statements to the effect. Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Also, we discussed those issues, those matters, knowing your ability to be crystal clear and clear cut in your messages. We would like to have your contribution on discussion of some of those tracks, as the new political lingo has it. So we would like you to answer the question: what is this whole business is about? Change of rhetoric, change of strategy. What is it? And what would you like to tell this group, journalists, diplomats? Thank you for this survey. Much appreciated, and I fully agree, completely agree, that this is very much to the point. The most important issues converted into questions, and we are in tune with the general public. So he was right, and at the time of war, and at the time of combating this terrible aggression, this unity, this togetherness, according to our president, his address to the parliament and other occasions, this is part and parcel of our victory, and the most important prerequisite of it. Now, I'm not discussing the questions specifically, but it is important that the victory plan is mentioned, and we can see that the general public supports it. It is still topical for the President of Ukraine, for Ukraine. It's the victory plan that has all the means supposed to be employed. You know the contents, both military and diplomatic means will pave the way to our victory, as we expect. Point number one still is invitation to join NATO for Ukraine, and this is still on the agenda, President's agenda and foreign policy of Ukraine, and the respective bodies responsible for its implementation. And we know now from our partners' experience that this is the best security guarantee for Ukraine, the best, the most convenient, the biggest, and that's our strategic goal or objective. And talks with the partners about getting, even at this stage, already at this stage, invitation to join NATO. We will continue our efforts along those lines. All the partners, all the members, all the 32 members of the alliance. We listened to the President's statement yesterday, meetings with representatives of two countries, one of them leader of the opposition, but Germany matters. Matters a lot. We have to continue. Estonia's position is unwavering in their support of our NATO accession, of course. And our president yesterday said that the dialogue is to be continued with the United States. However, it is crystal clear that our membership in NATO as an issue, as an item on the agenda, is still with beyond our reach, under the aggression, before the victory. This is not for present day. This is not for immediate future. This is a prospect, but it should be there. And we have Sweden and Finland at Madrid summit. They got the decision of the members, and they were invited. And the next line was that presently for all NATO, security of NATO, Sweden are of importance. Well, that's one of the mechanisms to implement such guarantees for membership in NATO. If there is no such mechanism, where pursue, and we need some perseverance there. It didn't start yesterday. It started a long time ago. Bilateral security agreements, 27 bilateral agreements we have. The majority of them are NATO members. There are some neutral states in that respect, and the 28th is in the pipeline. I'm happy to announce, but this is very important. I'm calling upon the experts. Don't be skeptical. Read through the language of these documents. They are posted for the general public to observe, and some of them are already at work. We have the majority of such countries delivering. It's not just the assistance in 2024. They committed themselves to smaller amounts and smaller scopes, but the leaders announced that that was to be continued and continued in a regular fashion for the years to come, 10 years to be precise. The UK, with the new Prime Minister, first thing admitting that he was acquainted with the document and fully supported it and prepared to stay committed. And their budgets are our key. Now, allies, it's not immediate. If not immediate, we remember what was expected for 2024, and it should be the same kind of pace or dynamics, and the public discourse for the authorities and the parliaments of the said countries. Budget is not an easy matter. It never is.
We can talk about this. This work is in continuation, and these agreements are part of the guarantees of security. About other potential elements, the President will talk with the partners. Yesterday he mentioned this. He announced meeting on the level of some European partners, and one of the issues of the agenda there will be the question we're discussing here: membership in NATO and security guarantees for Ukraine before Ukraine joins NATO. Also, military support will be discussed. Other matters will be discussed. Of course, these issues were discussed within the meeting between President Zelensky and President Macron and future President Donald Trump. Also, integration to European Union and integration to NATO. We can talk a lot here. Whether it is possible to enter EU without entering NATO, these processes are simultaneous or not. You know, we can't afford ourselves to be neutral. We had this experience, and you know what happened. In fact, this is not a good case for Ukraine, so the processes are in continuation. They're in some sense simultaneous. If we are talking about the reforming of Ukraine, the processes of entering the European Union, the dynamics here is quite high. Ukraine was very successful to cover fundamentals cluster. All countries with the desire to join EU must do this, and Ukraine has successfully did this too. And now Ukraine is in the process of screening of the second cluster. On the 1st of December, Mr. Antonian Costa and Madam Kaya Kallas and Madam Marta Kos. This visit is very important, and it happened on the 1st of December. It was the first day of the mandate of these distinguished people, and they announced that Ukraine has all chances to open not even one but two clusters at the very beginning of 2025. Two clusters, and the screening is in process. And cluster 2 internal market is also very important now. We're in the process of screening. Of course, the decision of Ukraine joining EU, this will be a geopolitical decision, but before that, Ukraine must be as far ready as it's possible with all tools. That's why negotiation team is working day and night, headed by Madam Olga Stefanishina. We are not stopping. We work day and night to be technically ready accordingly to Ukraine is very quick, and Ukraine is giving the impulse to this process. In 2025, Poland will be heading EU, and there were discussion that we are going to open a few clusters under the Polish leadership in EU, and we do hope that this will happen, and it will help us to cover the path of joining EU quicker. Afterwards, Denmark will be leading EU, and recently there were negotiations between the head of Denmark and part of Ukraine, and the point of discussion was that Ukraine should open even more clusters in order to work at finalizing the agreements of joining EU. While having a discussion, we can discuss what will happen quicker, but integration to NATO and entering EU, these are two very important bricks of our victory. Ukraine wants peace, but when we are talking about peace, we're talking about fair and long-term peace. President Zelensky is telling all the time that we're not interested in peace on the circumstances of dictatorship of Russia, and we must be sure that Russian invasion won't happen again, or if it happens again, then it will be treated accordingly. Thank you. Here I would like to point out that Mr. Igor has mentioned, actually this is a new issue, a new question, we never formulated it. Whether is it possible to join EU without joining NATO, and the third part of Ukrainians think that it's not possible because security is the priority, and without the security there will be a risk of losing the existence of Ukraine. So the percentage in the society is quite high. The people who think that these processes must be simultaneous. Do we have Madam Ambassador in the room? Then I would like to give the floor to Gaël Vessier, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the French Republic to Ukraine. Gaël, you heard the discussion, and also one of the... Oh, we have an alert now. We have shelter here, and we will be monitoring the situation. Oh, we mentioned France, and now the alert appeared. Probably this is a signal. Oh, Madam Katarina. We were waiting for you, Madam Katarina. Many thanks. Then, what is the order of speakers? Mr. Ambassador, France became a discovery of the recent years for Ukrainian society. We are rethinking of the image of France in our community, in our think tank. We see France and one of very few countries that are able to think and to act geostrategically, and we're extremely grateful that France became such a strong power in the supporting of Ukrainian case. And on Saturday it was a diplomatic achievement what President Macron had done, the meeting that had happened. My sincere gratitude, especially when looking at some other European leaders and their reaction over Donald Trump's coming to the White House. And many thanks to France for supporting the idea that the idea of Ukraine must be heard. But for us it's important that the voice of our European friends and European Union must be heard at this table of negotiations. Thank you very much that France was the first country to give pass to very important decisions, and I would like to listen to your opinion. You as the ambassador, could you please comment on the contribution of France to what is going on in Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you for the proposal, for the presentation. Thank you, Igor, for your very enlightening speech, and welcome to all of you. Maybe just before recalling that, just a few words. Polls are always very interesting. At the end of the day, of course, as friends and allies of Ukraine, we look at polls, but of course we engage about what the official Ukrainian position is. And actually, in the long history of polling, state leaders are the ones who are able to make polls change, actually. So we follow the discussions with the Ukrainian authorities. Still, it's always very interesting. Having a quick look at that, actually, it strikes me that among the foreign people who are most popular in Ukraine, you have the head of the EU Commission, which is the hope of the Ukrainian accession, of course. You have a president of Poland who is going to take the seat as chairman of the Council of Ministers in January, and you have France as one of the main one of the very active EU partners. So all in all, there is a strong EU support and EU aspect to that, and I think it's very encouraging for us also as an EU country. So we try to bring a determined support to Ukraine. Thank you for recalling the diplomatic aspects of what happened in Paris, in Notre Dame last Saturday. I think it was very important that Ukrainians would have the opportunity to engage directly with President-elect Trump. It was not the first time President Zelensky, under the control of Igor, had met with President-elect Trump before the election, actually, and after, and they had phone calls, but it was very important that they could meet face-to-face, and we are happy to have facilitated that. Definitely it's key. We try to bring some strong humanitarian, civilian, but also military support. It's true that quite often we don't communicate so much about what we are doing because we don't believe in adding figures to figures. We believe in delivering on our commitments and to do this quickly and not in a lengthy way. The other thing is that and sometimes we are criticized for that, and I do appreciate that, but c'est la vie, as we say in French. The other thing is that what we are trying to do is actually to be part of a positive transformation for Ukraine. So, for example, France was the first country to deliver some tanks to Ukraine. They were light tanks, not fully heavy tanks, but actually we were the first ones to do that and to demonstrate that it was a good thing to do that, and that no, it was not escalatory, and that actually it was necessary for Ukraine to be in the situation to defend itself. And after us, many other countries did, which is with materials which actually are very useful for Ukraine now, such as Leopard tanks and Abrams tanks or whatever. Same thing for the EU. Actually, my president was instrumental into the channel of mine inside the EU to support Ukraine accession and the opening of talks, and we are very proud of that. And something also for saying clearly, including last February, that there should be no red lines on our side, including, and then in May, including for long range, including for NATO, which is something that we have no difficulty with. So I think it is important to sometimes including to take some risks, but through public opinion, but to be able to say that no, it's possible to support Ukraine, we should do more. Actually, there are high expectations on international partners, and rightly so. Then about all this discussion about security guarantees, well, we do think, and my president said that publicly, that we, as friends and partners of Ukraine, we have a responsibility, which is to think about it and to get prepared, so that when the time would come, and if Ukraine would ask us, we would be in a position to support them as much as we can, and to participate fully into a process that would lead to just long and sustainable peace. But the important thing is that it must be driven by Ukraine. Ukraine is the victim. It's up to Ukraine to define when it's able to talk and on which basis, and we are here to support. Actually, it also means planning, technically, on what we can do, what we cannot do militarily. It also needs planning politically. It's not obvious. It's not something which is a given. And actually, we have to explain that also to our own people. So there are lots of thinking, which is fair enough. But again, things are going to be set by Ukraine and should be set by Ukraine at the end of the day. And we fully support that. Very last thing that I wanted to mention, but of course I'm able to engage into other questions. There is a question about nuclear. What would be the first security guarantee? And majority of, or the highest number of people would say it's becoming nuclear. It's a logical thing to say to some extent. And I think that this is exactly why there is a worldwide interest which goes far beyond from EU countries, that this war would be a victory for Ukraine. Why? Because, of course, for us it's key for our own security, right? But even if you are in Asia or in Africa or very, very far away, actually, if there would not be a victory for Ukraine, it would mean a victory for Putin. It would mean a victory for any country who actually is a nuclear country and can take pieces of its neighbors. And the natural consequence of that is that people would say, okay, the only guarantee I really have is becoming nuclear. So it means that the number of nuclear countries could go, military nuclear countries could go to the current number to far more. And if we go down this road, actually the world will be much, much more dangerous for everybody than what it is right now. So I think it's a good example of why there is a global, worldwide necessity that actually Ukraine would be helped into winning this war.
Дуже дякую. Так, дійсно, з двох найпопулярніших опцій
Thank you very much. Speaking of two options of security guarantees that Ukrainians selected, the development of our own nuclear weapon. This is point number one. And of course, this is an element of frustration. Even this is a sign of desperation, that there are no clear invitation to NATO for Ukraine, and it can be solved easily to give real security guarantees, to invite Ukraine to NATO. And I think that the desire to, in this case, desire to have nuclear weapon in Ukraine will decrease. Madam Ambassador, many thanks that you found time to join us, because we could not do this presentation without you, because the European Union is so clearly represented in our questionnaire. This is the biggest trust among all international partners. European Union is at the first place. This is higher and among everybody, and UN, for example, is decreasing in the list. from year to year, and the leader of European Commission has the most trust among all foreign leaders in Ukrainian society. And if we look at other results, we see that the level of trust to the European Union is very high, and your contribution here is observant. As an ambassador, you have been working on strengthening the cooperation between Ukraine and the European Union. You have been doing so much, and how do you see this trust that Ukraine bears for the EU, and how are you going to work with this trust afterwards?
Дуже дякую за запрошення.
Thank you very much for the invitation and good morning, everyone. Dear Alyona,
I was not supposed to be here at all. Then I got talked into, so I apologize for coming late and leaving early because I have a meeting I cannot change at 10 o'clock here. I was thinking why the EU comes up and President von der Leyen on top, but the whole sort of institutional trust in the EU, and I could come up with 3 reasons. One is that it indeed represents hope. Already on Maidan there were European flags, and then since Maidan there was always a little bit of a pause from the side of EU institutions, and I remember the lengthy discussions over every word in summit conclusions or association council final declarations. And so I think the hope is what at this dark hour gives perspective, and the EU flag. So I think that's the overall one, but that would not be enough. I think the main second reason is that despite all odds, we are a big tanker that doesn't move very fast, but we delivered. And we mobilized in February, both in terms of the assistance and support, and Gael spoke about that, and also in terms of pushing ourselves on the enlargement agenda in quite creative ways. And I think that's credit goes to the institutions, credit goes to the leaders among the member states that made that possible. And 3, I would say, is actually the work of the Ukrainians, over the last 10 years, the work of the reformers, the push by the civil society, the legislative achievements of the various sessions of the Rada, the leadership, and then came the full-scale invasion, the heroism and resilience that we have seen EU responded to. So it's tied together that we were able to do the so far delivery in reaction to what we have seen and experienced. Now there is also a factor which was seen with previous enlargements of the EU. The fact that EU was more trusted than local elites was in many countries, including my own. When you have regular political life and political battle, and especially in an excruciatingly difficult circumstances like the full-scale invasion, then it's easier to sort of eclipse what you're looking at in terms of your own leadership and say, okay, they must be better. Now, that is very frequently followed by disappointment with the EU. And so the moods very much can vary. But I think we are now on the ascendance, and I think it will keep high as long as there is not going to be the disappointment. We had a situation in the last decade where where promises were made vis-à-vis the Western Balkans, and then it was not possible to find consensus, and there came a huge dip in terms of trust to the EU. But I very much hope that's not going to be the case here. And I would also want to end by saying that personalities matter as well. Persons matter. And Ursula von der Leyen, in fact, really devoted a lot of personal energy, personal political courage, personal sort of invention into supporting Ukraine. She has been here 8 times since the full-scale invasion, and anybody who makes this trip regularly knows that's even physically demanding. So I think that's part of why she came on top. But I think the general thrust of trust comes from the hope it represents.
Дуже дякую, пані посол.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Indeed, personalities matter, they do. And we hope with the new leadership of the EU, which on the very first day visited, well, in person of Ursula von der Leyen, so we would like to see more persons like her, more new energy. We need it badly, because more than 1/3 of Ukrainians expect well, within 5 years for us to become a member. We have to work on managing the expectations, and the Ukrainian authority and the expert community as civil society. And I'm very grateful to you indeed for facilitating the meeting with the leaders of the EU, for the experts, for the civil society. That was a very important conversation, very important conference, and we hope that subsequent meetings will also include representatives of the authorities and expert community, for that matter. Thank you very much for your work. Your Excellency, I know that you have to leave us, unfortunately. Ihor, thank you, Mr. Zhokwa, for staying with us. I know that you also have to leave. And there are 2 experts. Ambassador France is staying with us. We are very grateful for Frederick Wessler and Olena Holushko, who will discuss now in a very genuine and frank fashion, I'm sure, Frederick Wessler and Olena Halushka, to discuss the results, in particular those results that we haven't mentioned even yet. And among them we have this result, which is very interesting in its own right. Has nothing to do with the EU, but with the United States it has. And we had the survey in those days when the president-elect became known, and Donald Trump is president-elect now. So we asked people how they trust this president. Last year we had a slightly different question to offer. Methodologically we cannot really match the 2 this year, but trust in Donald Trump over last year increased considerably among Ukrainians, notwithstanding the fact that the rhetoric was a bit confusing. Trust in Joe Biden, the incumbent president, decreased considerably, and he wasn't in the top 5. Last year Joseph Biden was president, and the international leader enjoyed the highest trust of Ukrainians. I think this is a great signal for the new administration. Also, it is very important for us to work with the new administration, because we compared, you see, level of trust in Donald Trump versus EU jurisdictions in Ukraine, which is supposed to be, according to all the projections, to be the principal victim of his victory. The level of trust is higher than in any other country, inclusive of Hungary, whose leader is a close friend of Donald Trump's, as we know. This is one of the discoveries made perhaps Olena Halushka, and we spent a lot of time in advocacy visits, also calling at Joe Biden's administration, also visiting Republicans, having conferences with them. So perhaps, Olena, you can comment on this phenomenon and what we have to make out of it, really, because the favorite question, or one of the favorite of yours, and we use that for advocacy back then, pressure of the EU and the US in things concerning corruption, pressure on the Ukrainian authorities, and we saw last year a considerable spike of appreciation in the Ukrainian society for the US and the EU to put pressure on the Ukrainian authority versus this year, because one of the arguments, and that he was referring to it, is this: many Ukrainians now perceive this pressure as an excuse to deny Ukraine the necessary assistance and support. So please, very briefly on the two issues I proposed for this panel. Please. Let me start with the second one, which is, I think, in good taste. I would break it down into two aspects. Well, that speaks for the fact, this situation speaks for the fact that the attitude changes in Ukraine, and that is related to the statements before the latest NATO summit in July. No invitation for Ukraine because Ukraine is still corrupt, supposedly, and in our opinion, this is totally wrong. Moreover, this kind of communication undermines our advocacy and our fight against corruption, because one of the principal, fundamental drivers of our fight against corruption is transparency. This is investigative journalism, the civil society's efforts. They bring it up to the surface so that the situation can be diagnosed and the disease can be cured, while the diagnostics are related to the lack of progress in our integration into NATO, into the EU. That undermines also the society's trust in such processes, and any kind of developments around the corruption. And we have to be frank, whether we should continue combating corruption, is it still a home task? Of course it is, but the principal reason we are not, for which we're not invited is fear of Russia, 63%. This is a declining figure, but still very high. And what it means, it demonstrates who is really the locomotive of reforms of Ukraine. Many partners of ours think that those changes, combating corruption, reform for the rule of law, it is all imposed from the outside, and we do that because, well, that's the EU's or IMF's request. No, starting from 2013, the Ukrainian Society signaled that they were the actor in this process. We went to the Maidan for justice, for fairness, under the banners of the European Union, and there was this correlation between justice, reforms, and the European values. Euro integration for Ukrainians is not a goal in its own right. This is a tool to achieve all the necessary reforms and carry on. I remember the candidacy campaign. We would talk very closely to the pro-Ukrainian countries, but skeptical about the reforms. The Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, at that point, one of the questions from them was, what if you do not conclude the reforms during the EU? There won't be any tool to put pressure. You should not reveal all the secrets. We have some diplomats here. Well, but we talked to the experts also. This is important indeed. And what we would explain is this. The most important reason why this is irreversible in Ukraine, it's people of Ukraine and their will, and our investigative journalists, because we as Ukrainians are not satisfied with the reforms. The Western parties are not satisfied, but 2 days prior to the full-scale invasion, Putin, in his statement when he was declaring a war, a full-scale war, called all our institutions, the anti-corruption reform, the judicial reform. That means that he takes heed of that, and as a risk, he considers the results of this positive transformation, and he sees it as a threat and the trajectory of Ukraine developing. This is about reforms. Now about liking President Trump. I was astonished by the results, quite frankly. I think this is how Ukrainians see this approach, as long as it takes, or manage the escalation and this kind of support for Ukraine on the part of the Western partners. And we are asked for assistance in 2022 in the scope that would be sufficient for the counteroffensive in autumn 2022, but that was all prolonged, and because of the procrastination we had the change of fate for Ukraine on the battlefield. So this is actually a frustration with the current administration, and the hope for the new one. Yes, we discussed the expectations, the hopes that the new president and the new administration would be much more decisive. How decisive, it's not clear. And some part of the society invests in Donald Trump's their hopes to conclude this war sooner rather than later. On what conditions it's another matter, but the expectations, the hopes invested on different policy, different strategy, the strategy and expedient conclusion of this war. Frederick, I don't know what you would like to comment as regards our survey, because you're a multi-special expert, but security guarantees among them, NATO accession. So what surprised you? What astonished you perhaps? You know Ukraine well, you know the EU, NATO, of course, and what surprised you, and what we as Ukrainians can use to actually reinforce our arguments for invitation to NATO and conclusion of this war on favorable conditions for Ukraine. Or suspension of the war a bit, because we're not talking about the conclusion. It's more like suspension.
Thank you for organizing. Thank you to the New Europe Center for organizing this event and conducting this poll. As you said, I mean, Ukraine is a democracy, and these polls do matter. I mean, I think policymakers, decision makers, take them very seriously, and I think this is also, reflected in some of the recent comments by President Zelensky, even. What really struck me with this poll was, I think you're right in the introduction that it's a mix of optimism and pessimism, but I would really say it's a mix of realism and hope. And I think it's quite impressive how, for the most part, the Ukrainians have a very solid understanding of the situation at hand, and a very sort of, I would say, good intuition about what's doable and not doable, and what's needed as well. Let me just point to a few things which I think really sort of jumped out, and I will end with Trump, because I think this is also one of the more important questions of today. I mean, first of all, the notion that NATO membership for Ukraine is the best security guarantee, I think this is absolutely correct. I'm from Sweden. Sweden and Finland, after February 2022, quickly came to the conclusion that existing in this gray zone between Russia and NATO, the risk was just unacceptably high of being invaded. And the sense of being neutral or non-aligned may have at some point provided some form of neutrality, but after February 2022, this was no longer the case. And if it holds true for much better. If it holds true for Sweden and Finland, it so obviously holds true for Ukraine. But the key question is, of course, how to get there, how to get to NATO membership for Ukraine, because Ukraine is under attack. It's a country at war. And I think this has been the sort of the conceptual challenge for quite some time, that Kiev has sort of demanded NATO membership now. And the challenge with this approach has been that many, or not many, but some allies have quickly drawn the conclusion by this very sort of strong demand that, this is completely impossible because Ukraine is a country at war. So I think what's important, and what I think this poll sort of shows, and what President Zelensky also sort of indicated in his interview in Sky News recently, is sort of the path to getting to membership. How do you actually get there? There's a sort of pedagogical exercise that needs to be done to show how an invitation, how accession process, and how membership leads to war termination, that it's actually de-escalatory rather than escalatory, because this has been the fear in some big allies, that NATO membership would be escalatory. So I think more work needs to be done there, but I think we're sort of moving in that direction. And when it comes to invitation, I think this is really a sort of a no-brainer, because an invitation doesn't mean any legally binding security guarantees. It's a sort of a, it's cost-free for NATO in a sense, because it doesn't really entail anything substantive, but it would be an enormous boost for Ukraine, obviously, and it would send an extremely strong signal to Moscow that they do not have a veto over Ukraine's accession process and eventual membership of NATO. But I think what you also need beyond an invitation is a very serious accession process. And the way that I tend to see this is that you need an accession process that should run possibly in parallel with negotiations between Kiev and Russia. These processes should be separate, but they would sort of feed into each other. And if you have a serious NATO accession process, you would very much strengthen Ukraine's hand at the negotiation table. I think this is a little bit, the sort of the Western approach now. How can we strengthen Ukraine's hand in eventual negotiations? And I think, the accession process is really what's needed here. Also, you have in this poll, this question of gradual or partial accession, sort of, a geographical limitation on the application of Article 5. I think this is also an extremely important discussion that needs to be had. I don't think anybody in the West is sort of, expecting Kiev to formally relinquish the territories under Russian occupation. But still, the reality is that Russia controls these territories, occupies these territories. So how do you relate to that? And here I think the 1955 West Germany model is the way to go. And I think from the poll it's quite interesting that this is sort of gaining more traction as an idea.
Хоча коли пан Расмусен робив про це заяву, тому що Фредерік
Though, Frederick, you're working in Rasmussen Group, and when Mr. Rasmussen announced this last year, the reaction was very negative, but now we see how the situation is changing and how important it is to communicate in a about this in a proper way, because Western Germany can be a reference point here. But still, this will be another Ukrainian model, and we're talking here that for us, invitation for Ukraine is for entire Ukraine. This is important. In German case, it was only about the Western Germany, and we see the change in opinions if to compare with the last year. Thank you very much. And about Trump.
On that last point, I mean, I think it is very important to get this right. I think membership of NATO for Ukraine should cover all the territory of Ukraine, including Crimea and the rest of the occupied territories, of course. But the question is the application of Article 5. I think this is the sort of the key question. Before getting to Trump, let me just touch upon this question of EU membership and NATO membership. Obviously, there's no formal requirement for a new EU member to be a member of NATO as well. It's not a prerequisite in any sort of formal legal sense. But I mean, you know, if we imagine a few years from now, the chapters have been closed, Ukraine is sort of at the European Council in Brussels, there's, you know, it's sort of the final decision to make Ukraine a member of the EU. I mean, if Ukraine is under the threat of a Russian attack again, of Russian aggression again, I mean, it's very difficult to see that European leaders would go through with this. So you really do, from a political, practical point of view, you need to make Ukraine a member of NATO as well, you know, in order for it to also become a member of the EU, just from a very sort of practical sense. And then on Trump, I think very interesting here, you know, obviously there's a lot of anxiety in Europe about Trump and what he will do. You know, we've seen the threats of tariffs against Canada, Mexico. I'm sure they're going to come towards Europe as well. But when it comes to Ukraine, I don't think it's completely pitch black. And I say this for a few reasons. I think, first of all, the choice of Waltz as his national security advisor and Kellogg as his Ukraine envoy these are not bad choices. I mean, these are both military men. They understand peace through strength. They understand the reality of the battleground, how this plays into negotiations. And I think what will happen, you know, Trump has promised that he will end the war in 24 hours without really providing any details, of course, but still, this has been his promise. But I think he will quite soon realize that, you know, in Moscow, they have far-reaching demands which, you know, not even the Trump administration could accept. So you may very quickly end up in a situation where the Trump administration will provide additional support to Ukraine, for instance, more military assistance, in order to put more pressure on Russia to enter into agreements. This is sort of a very short, simplified version, but I think, you know, the complexity of the situation sort of lends itself to a Trump administration that could actually be quite supportive of Ukraine.
Дякую дуже. Пан посол, ви б хотіли?
If I may react very quickly. Thank you.
Your Excellency.
It's very enlightening that we had, and thank you for that. Well, first thing is a reaction to what Olena did say about fight against corruption being driven by Ukrainian people themselves. Yes, absolutely. And of course, it's the only way that it can work, because if it is imposed from outside, it's never going to work. We know that it's coming from the people, but we don't see that as any kind of paradoxical situation between leading the war, fighting the war, and at the same time making reforms, entering into, and at the end of the day, entering into the EU. Actually, for us, it's one and the single thing, and I think that the Ukrainians do know what they want. They want to be free, they want independent, and they want to be Westerners, or want to be fully Europeans, and that includes being member of the EU. We fully support that. And I think it is driven by the people, and that's the key thing. So we certainly have to engage in that. It's also why we have to deliver, and the EU has to deliver in making this concrete, real, and in front-loading as much as possible some benefits of the enlargement to come. That's the first thing. Second thing about NATO, well, as you know, France supports the idea of Ukraine joining NATO, so we have no difficulty in that. However, the truth of this matter is that it is a unanimity decision by the nations of NATO, and so there can perfectly be a situation where actually neither accession to NATO in the short run nor an invitation from NATO to join NATO in the short run would be available. So it's very important. Well, we fully agree that it would be great, and the sooner the better, but it's important to take that into account and to think of other tracks too, because that's the reality of the world we live in. This said, I completely follow the logic that Ukraine would be safer entering into NATO, that the war would be shorter if Ukraine would enter into NATO, and that the security of the continental Europe would be stronger when Ukraine would enter into NATO. This is what we believe in. Still, at the end of the day, it's a unanimity decision by nations of the Paris Treaty. So this has to be taken into account.
Track 2, what did you mean?
I don't, well, right, track 2, but you have to think out of the box to what can security guarantee actually mean. Obviously, Article 5 of NATO is the ultimate security guarantee in the world we live in. What would security guarantee mean outside of this? And this has to be thought about, knowing that, of course, again, NATO would be great.
З нашої точки зору, трек
From our point of view, track 2, this is not a guarantee of security, but this is a complementary element, and these may be related to those military missions that should be not only on the ground but also cover Ukrainian sky. It means a shield in the air, not only over Western Ukraine but also covering entire Ukraine. We are very grateful for the leadership of France. And we understand that it's very difficult to find the consensus in EU, in NATO, and even on the level of G7. That's why we see France as one of the leaders of the coalition of the daring, those who are ready to ignore so-called red lines of Mr. Putin. And in fact, these ideas, military ideas, we support this in our think tank. Olena, one remark, and I see that we have some time for questions. If you have some, please don't hesitate to ask. Any remarks, any questions? You will have an opportunity to. In fact, it wasn't a part of the questionnaire, but it's important to talk about this here. Now, so many plans are discussed. It's not understandable what is the content of that plan, but one point is really dangerous and we need to reduce it. It's about releasing sanctions for Russia. Actually, we have this question. What is the attitude of Ukrainians towards the compromise for negotiation of the question of reparations and sanctions? There is no support of Ukrainian society. Here it's very important to understand that there are 300 billion dollars of Russian central bank in the countries of Group 7. Now Denmark and EU contributed the incomes for developing Ukrainian weapon. France ordered weapon that will be sent to Ukraine. And if Ukraine get the credits, but if now these costs will be sent back to Russia instead of contributed to Ukraine's recovery, buying American weapon for Ukraine, and this is very beneficial for the talks with President Trump. But if this money goes to Russia, then Russian military budget $140 billion. So this resource, two military budgets for Russia for 2025, and they will kill Ukrainians and EU members. So we will have some questions, and then Frederick will react. Sergei Sidorenko, Madam Irina, and Mr. Sergei. I would like to voice a remark about the change of mind towards the consecutive approach to NATO. I would like to say, when we compare it to the previous year, because the question previously was different. That's why it's difficult to talk about the change of attitude from the society of Ukraine. And in Ukraine expert community, not all people think that this is a priority pass. I am not a supporter of this because it won't work. This is impossible. It won't work. We can talk about this, but let's not be enchanted and charmed, and NATO members won't find consensus to invite the country that is in the war and doesn't want to forget about the territories. If we provide commitments that we won't fight for these territories ever again, we won't agree for that, and I don't like this part. Yes, now there is more understanding this year, but also there are other studies and questionnaires, but there is no consensus in this question in expert community. Madam Irina. Thank you very much for your big work. We are preparing now a very important committee, roundtable committee of foreign policy towards NATO, and about Ukrainian trust to Trump. It seems to me that Ukrainian water likes the idea of the war stops in 24 hours. We have just recently came back from the United States of America. This transition is really interesting period, and Trump's administration is sending a signal that EU must pay more for its security and take more commitments and control over support and of Ukraine. What about the readiness of EU to pay more for its security and to support Ukraine more? And the second question, the 30th anniversary of Budapest Memorandum, and in the US it was the most important phrase in all premises. We promised you nothing according to memorandum. America didn't attack Ukraine. It was our commitment to get the UN meeting. That's all. Are there any signs of rethinking that this understanding of the document provokes more threats in new axis of evil? Sergei Stukhanov, the Ukrainian radio, a question to His Excellency Ambassador of France. I think people in Ukraine like Macron very much because the question is, are we far away or closer to sending armed forces to Ukraine from France? Whether it can happen or not, what do you think? By the way, Madam Marina, we are hearing this since 2014 that the US promised only consultations and they have no legal commitments, but moral and political obligation is really high. That's why we have every right to talk about the Budapest Memorandum and how to work with the mistakes in Budapest and Bucharest, by the way. Your Excellency, Mr. Ambassador.
Uh, I think it's a key question. Can the EU or European countries, let's say, including UK, can we collectively substitute for the US in the case the US would stop any kind of support to Ukraine? God forbid, and I'm convinced this won't happen and that the US would continue supporting Ukraine. But anyway, good question. And the sad answer is not completely, definitely. Well, we can certainly pay more, we can send more budget support, we can do, make the extra mile, but there are things that where we cannot substitute the US because we don't have the military capacity. The Patriots are American systems. That's life. We have French and Italian Santi, but definitely not the numbers which would be necessary to protect Ukraine. Same thing, we have Scalps and Storm Shadows, French and Brits, definitely not the numbers that Ukraine would need and which could substitute for ATACMS, and so on and so forth. So the truth of the matter is that we have to work together with the United States of America, and that in this discussion it's perfectly clear that there is an expectation from the incoming Trump administration that the Europeans should do more, and I think on substance it's something perfectly understandable, because actually this is our security which is even more directly concerned. But that the EU should do more doesn't mean that the US should do nothing. And in fact, for the EU to do more, we need the US to remain in this with us. Maybe not in the same way, maybe in a different way. Maybe we can imagine new things, but they have to be around. Otherwise, I think it is not going anywhere. So thank you for that, and I think it's quite. And the last thing is. It would be also very dangerous if, at the end of the day, and again, God forbid, I think that the Americans will not do that, but if some European countries would have to choose between supporting Ukraine and being close to the US, that would be the worst question ever, and I don't know what the answers would be. So definitely, let's frame this work together, and this is why it's so important to meet with President Trump, so that President-elect Trump, so that this would just be a rhetorical question. And again, I think that this is the direction we are going into, working together, continuing to work together, maybe a bit differently.
Frederick.
I think Europe needs to do 4 things when it comes to the Trump administration in Ukraine. First of all, I mean, really ramp up defense spending. So go to 3% defense spending, of which 0.5 should go directly to Ukraine, military assistance to Ukraine, including investment in the Ukrainian defense sector, which has been extremely promising, and Denmark has really led the way here in terms of Europeans investing in Ukraine defense spending. And then secondly, Olena mentioned the 300 billion of Russian frozen assets. I mean, more than 200 billion are in Europe, and these we should seize and also give to Ukraine for weapons and ammunition. Then thirdly, we need to put more skin in the game. And here, this is about sending European military trainers and advisors to Ukraine in numbers, and also making sure that this could be, the beginning, the sort of a nascent force for a potential ceasefire in the future. And also, I think, Western countries, in particular the frontline states, but also with the backing of UK, France, US and others, should commit to shooting down Russian drones and missiles in Western Ukraine, over the territory of Ukraine, and especially those that actually enter the airspace of NATO allies, which seems to be a no-brainer. So, in order for us to make sure that the Trump administration continues supporting Ukraine, Europe needs to step up and be more engaged. I think this is the key, because it shows that we're relevant, that it will show us having leverage as well, and it will mean that, in terms of any future negotiations, that the Europeans will actually be able to be part of this, which is essential given that this is all about European security at the end of the day, because the best way to invest in European security is to invest in Ukraine's security.
Мені здається, що насправді
It seems to me that if Europe forfeits the Russian assets, it would be a win-win for everyone. On the one hand, that would demonstrate commitment of the EU, because the EU countries hold most of the assets, and then that can be invested into the American weapons, because now the income is generated by the Euroclear. It's 180 billion. That's the revenue, and that is invested in the less risky assets. So that's deposited, basically. So if we take 300 billion, concentrate in one bank in Belgium, for example, Belgium to feel more comfortable, so that they hold actually the assets and they have no financial problems. That should be administered by a bank with all the safeguards, the debt, and the G7 backup, and plus Ukraine. Ukraine as an actor should be visible here, and the bank will be assigned with the task to use the body of this to compensate for the losses and to increase the revenues. The investment bankers say that we can make not 3 to 4 billion annually, but 15 to 20 instead. So that can be used much more effectively, and that includes the European weapons, Ukrainian defense industries being reinforced, and the US, and investment into the Ukrainian defense sector, because this is one of the most important pillars of our security. Thank you very much, Olena. Yes, our time is up for these presentations and for the presentation and question. Thanks to all the keynote speakers, all the participants, and I think that this is a promising beginning for a very frank and open discussion. And you are invited to attend our new events and New Europe Center. We always welcome your feedback on this presentation and other products of ours. As Frederick said, the best investment into European security and global security, I would add, is investment into the Ukrainian one. So thanks to all the partners and the ambassadors, especially who joined us today. Thank you for your invaluable contribution. We appreciate it very much. I'm speaking on behalf of Ukrainians. We're a bit frustrated, but we are not less thankful because of that. Thank you very much for your support.